The rink smelled the same after all these years. Old freon, wet wood, and the sour chemical ghost of spilled soda. The electricity had been cut a decade ago, but the place still hummed with a memory that wasn't ready to die. Moonlight leaked through broken skylights, slicing the darkness into jagged shapes, turning the warped floor into a patchwork of silver and black. My footsteps echoed too loudly in the hollow space, each creak of rotted boards a question I'd never really answered. You don't forget where you last saw someone alive. Not really. You just learn to walk around it. The roller rink had been shut down after the tourists stopped coming, left to collapse in on itself at the edge of town. The sign outside still clung to one rusted loop of chain, swinging when the coastal wind picked up. Starlight Skate, its paint flaked and peeling, stars reduced to pale pockmarks against a dead blue sky. Inside, the air froze on my skin, as if the cold had been waiting just for me, preserved like the dust. My flashlight stayed off. I didn't need it. I knew the shadows here. The concession counter was still in place, a low, chipped barrier between the empty rink and the memory of Friday nights that used to throb with neon and music. Back then, teenagers clustered here, trading dollar bills for paper cups of Coke and greasy fries while the DJ played songs no one remembers anymore, except in the way a heart tightens when the first notes slip in through a store radio. Back then, she had stood behind this counter. I could still see her if I let my eyes rest in the darkness long enough. Maeve Larkin, 19, with a mop of dark curls pinned up in a loose knot, a thin silver chain at her throat. The kind of girl who laughed with her whole face, then cut it short like she'd said too much. She moved to our town from Portland the winter before she disappeared, working nights at the rink while saving for a camera she swore would get her out of Maine. She wanted to photograph cities that didn't smell like fish and diesel, she told me. Places where nobody knew anyone's grandparents. I hadn't spoken her name out loud in years. I barely even let myself think it, as if the syllables themselves were some kind of spell that might drag the past up through the floorboards. But here, with the wind worrying at the broken door and the distant crash of waves scraping at the shoreline, her name pulsed inside my skull. Maeve, Maeve, Maeve. The silence felt heavier than sound. It pressed in from the ceiling, from the dead speakers, from the abandoned DJ booth where the glass was spiderwebbed with cracks. It collected on the scuffed rink floor where lines of old tape still traced faded roots in yellow and red. It pooled beneath the disco ball hanging motionless in the center of the room, every mirrored fragment blind with dust. I didn't know why I'd come alone. The department thought I was just clearing out old junk from an unused storage property the town was finally ready to sell off. "Sign whatever forms they shove at you, Callahan," the chief had said. "We're not in the real estate business." But my route here had nothing to do with paperwork. It had everything to do with the locked cabinet in the basement archive, with the box I'd opened earlier that afternoon when I shouldn't have. It had everything to do with the year 1982, and the girl who vanished between one song and the next. I walked out onto the rink, boards moaning under my weight. The place felt smaller than I remembered, shrunken by decay. Back then, it had seemed endless, a whole bright universe spinning under cheap-colored lights. Now only the faint smell of mildew and salt remained, the sea slowly reclaiming the building through hairline cracks and loose panels. There's a particular kind of guilt that doesn't shout. It sits with you instead, like a quiet passenger in the backseat, fogging up the glass while you try to focus on the road. It had ridden beside me for 43 years, silent and patient, waiting for nights like this. A strip of moonlight fell across the floor, touching the spot where she'd stood the last time I saw her, one hand resting on the edge of the counter, the other fiddling with the chain at her neck. She'd been saying something then, something about a ride home, about the storm rolling in off the bay. I remember nodding. I remember promising. I remember leaving without her. Wind rattled the thin aluminum door behind me, and I flinched, swallowed the old reflex to call out her name. The town of Harrow's Point had long ago filed her away under missing, presumed deceased, Maine State Police Case 823547. But the building remembered. Memory was a physical thing here. The gouges in the wood where skates had carved frantic arcs, the faint stains from spilled soda, and who knows what else, the brittle flyers still stapled to the corkboard advertising long-finished events. In the dim light, everything felt suspended between collapse and preservation, as if the past hadn't decided yet whether to let go or tighten its grip. This was where my life had split into before and after. And somewhere in the quiet, half-rotted heart of the rink, I felt it, a tug, like a string being pulled tight from the other side of decades. Not a sound, not exactly, more like the echo of one, the weight of silence bending toward a truth I'd refused to hear. I wasn't ready to know it, but it had already started. 2. Old Disappearance resurfaces after discovery of symbolic object. The call came just after dawn, at that thin, colorless hour when the world looks like it hasn't decided if it's going to keep going. I was still half-dressed, shirt hanging open, my mind lodged somewhere between the roller rink and the sleep that had finally ambushed me on the couch. The phone trilled across the kitchen counter, vibrating against a ring of coffee stains, and something in the sound told me it was about the past. Callahan. Detective, it's O'Malley. You awake? He wouldn't have asked if he didn't already know the answer. I am now. A hesitation on the other end, a breath drawn in like it might sting on the way out. We got a situation at St. Brigid's. Construction crew tearing up the old rectory foundation. They found something. My eyes drifted to the window. Outside, the November sky over Harrow's Point was the color of dirty dishwater. The houses hunched against the wind like they'd been scolded. Somewhere beyond the roofs and bare trees, the Atlantic groaned to itself, its waves chewing at the rocky shoreline. Something like what? I asked, though I already knew. The past never calls this early unless it's decided to show you teeth. Looks like personal effects. O'Malley's voice dropped. There's a necklace, sir, silver, with a little camera charm on it, and a name engraved on the back. A thin silver chain, the glint of a charm when she leaned over the counter to hand me my change. A laugh cut short. What name? My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded older. Maeve Larkin, you'd better get down here. St. Brigid sat on the hill overlooking most of Harrow's Point, its stone walls blackened by salt and time. The rectory next door had been condemned after the roof partially collapsed 2 winters ago. Now the parish had finally raised enough money to demolish it and build something new. Fresh start. Clean slate. The usual lies people tell themselves when they want to believe they can outrun what they've buried. The site was roped off with flimsy plastic tape that snapped in the wind, Allied construction printed across it in bold black letters. Heavy machinery crouched in the torn-up earth, their metal arms frozen mid-gesture like giant insects caught in amber. The crew huddled near the makeshift trailer office, jackets zipped up to their chins, faces turned away from the uncovered hole in the ground. I didn't look down at first. I looked at their eyes. There's a way people stare when they've stumbled onto something they know they weren't meant to see. A careful, almost reverent distance, as if proximity alone might invite whatever curse has been sleeping under their town to climb up and look around. O'Malley met me halfway. Down there, sir. His voice was softer than usual, stripped of its usual sarcasm. He nodded to the priest standing off to the side, hands knitted so tightly together the knuckles were bone white. Father Keene called it in like a pro. Fewer details, I said, automatic. Fewer stories later. O'Malley nodded. Too late for that, I think. I stepped to the edge of the excavation. The earth was gutted open, layers of soil and stone exposed like cross-sectioned flesh. At the bottom, partially embedded in the churned-up dirt, lay the necklace. It was surprisingly clean, as if time itself had taken care not to touch it. A slim silver chain, filigree links glinting faintly in the gray light. The charm was a tiny camera, the kind that would have seemed kitschy even in '82, square-bodied, a tiny lens, details etched in miniature. It lay on its side, as if it had been dropped rather than discarded. A plastic evidence marker had already been placed beside it, one in stark black against white. I crouched down, the chill from the ground seeping up through my knees. For a moment the world narrowed to the dirt, the necklace, my own breath moving in and out. "Don't touch it," O'Malley said, almost apologetically. I didn't need to. My fingers remembered it. Maeve used to play with that charm when she was thinking, rolling it between thumb and forefinger. She claimed it was proof that one day she'd buy the real thing, a camera that wasn't disposable or borrowed, something with weight and glass and an aperture she could control. "You see differently when you look through one," she told me once, leaning on the rink counter. "It gives you distance, like you can finally decide what to keep and what to let go." I stared at the tiny camera charm half buried in earth, and the years folded in on themselves, overlapping so tightly I could barely breathe. Maeve's chain had never been found. It wasn't listed among her belongings. It didn't appear in the inventory of the locker she kept at the rink or the room she rented above the laundromat. It wasn't in the evidence boxes, the ones I'd memorized in the way some people memorize prayers. And yet here it was, dug up from beneath a priest's house. Something twisted at the base of my skull, a slow turning of gears that had rusted in place decades ago. The rectory wasn't far from the rink, maybe a 15-minute walk if you cut down Harbor Street and crossed through the old rail yard. I thought of the night she disappeared, the storm blowing in, the arguments at home, the way I'd chosen to drive off with my friends instead of waiting for her to finish her shift. "The crew says it was about 4 feet down," O'Malley murmured, "mixed in with some old concrete and rubble. We'll get the CSU team out. Full dig, top to bottom." I nodded, eyes still on the chain. 4 feet down, buried deliberately then. Not a lost trinket swallowed by time, but something placed, hidden, in a hole that shouldn't have been opened. Symbolic objects are funny things. They don't just represent the person who owned them. They represent the version of that person you chose to see. To the town, this necklace would be evidence. To me, it was a confession from the past, and I wasn't sure whose. I finally straightened, my knees protesting. The wind whipped at the tape, making it snap and flutter. Father Keene crossed himself when I met his eyes. "We built on hollow ground," he said quietly, the barest hint of an Irish lilt still clinging to his words. "Seems gods decided we should know what's underneath." I didn't answer him. The truth didn't feel divine. It felt like the sea, cold, relentless, and indifferent to whoever it pulled under. Somewhere between the rink and the rectory foundation, in the space where a silver chain had once rested against a young woman's collarbone, the case I'd spent my career quietly ignoring opened its eyes. I heard it in the silence between the workers' murmurs, in the hollow clank of excavator treads, in the way the town's old church bell rang once in the distance and then stopped, as if reconsidering. Maeve Larkin's disappearance was no longer a ghost story from 1982. It had crawled back into the present, dragging the rest of my life with it. 3 investigator shows personal involvement, mixing duty with obsession. The incident room they gave us was small, windowless, and smelled faintly of dry erase markers and old coffee. It had been a storage closet once. You could still see the ghost outline of shelves on the walls. That felt appropriate. Cold cases are just that, lives shelved and forgotten, dust mixed with paperwork. I tacked the first photograph to the corkboard, in the center of the wall. It wasn't a crime scene photo. We never had those for Maeve. It was one I'd taken myself at a summer bonfire the July before she vanished. Someone else had aimed the disposable camera at us, yelled at us to stand closer, closer, and I'd thrown an arm around her shoulders like it was nothing. She rolled her eyes, but she'd leaned in anyway, her smile crooked, half-formed, as if she hadn't quite decided whether to stay in the frame. I'd found the photo in my mother's attic 15 years ago, stuffed in a shoebox between old Christmas cards and birth announcements. I told myself I'd brought it to the station as context. That was the word I used when anyone asked. Context, history, background. I didn't tell them I kept it in my top desk drawer. That on bad nights, I unfolded the cracked white border and traced the outline of her face with my thumb, the way you'd worry at a sore tooth. On the board, the photo looked like it was exactly where it belonged. That was the lie. "Sir," O'Malley hovered in the doorway, his arms full of cardboard archive boxes. The labels were printed in fading type, Larkin, Maeve, 1982. The ink had bled in places where humidity had gotten in. Pulled everything we had from the basement, took some doing. Half of it wasn't logged right. Half of it was logged by people who thought this was going nowhere, I said, not looking away from the photo. Set them on the table. He did as he was told. The weight of the boxes hitting the table sounded louder than it should have, like a dull verdict. The room suddenly felt smaller. "Chief wants an update by Friday," O'Malley added. "He says the media already got wind that something was dug up at the church. They're calling it a development in the Larkin case." Interesting word, development. As if the story had just been idle all this time, waiting for the right cue. As if it hadn't been rotting quietly beneath our boots. I peeled my gaze off the old photo and looked instead at the more recent shots spread out on the table. The necklace in situ at the rectory, the measuring tapes, the numbered markers. The chain bagged and tagged, now officially a piece of evidence instead of a ghost. I'd insisted on processing it myself. That was a breach in protocol, a detail I'd have chewed an officer out for if our roles were reversed. I told the techs it was a matter of ensuring nothing was missed, given the age of the case. I hadn't told them my hands had trembled when I sealed the evidence bag. That for a moment, I wanted to press the cold silver to my skin, just to see if it remembered me. "Sir," O'Malley said carefully, "this is personal for you, isn't it?" His question hung there, an uninvited shape in the room. I heard the hum of the fluorescent light overhead, the faint ticking of the ventilation system. The folder under my palm had grown warm. "Every case is personal," I said. It sounded automatic, which meant it sounded like a lie. He watched me, eyes narrowing just a fraction. "But you knew her." It wasn't really a question. Harrow's point wasn't big then, and it's smaller now. People talk. People remember who cried at which funeral and who didn't show up at all. They remember which faces were always just out of frame. "I was 16, I said finally. "We all knew each other." That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was messier, more intimate, and not something that fit neatly into a report. The whole truth was that I'd been the last person to see her alive, who wasn't related to her. Her mother, Eileen, still lived in town, though she was a softer, shadowed version of the woman I remembered. Her hair had gone white practically overnight after Maeve vanished. Her back bowed over as if she'd been asked to carry something too heavy and had never put it down. After I joined the state police and eventually transferred back to Harrow's Point, I'd run into her at the grocery store sometimes. She'd always smile at me, polite, distant. She'd ask how my mother was, if work was busy. But she never once asked about Maeve. I wasn't sure if that was forgiveness or accusation. "Pull everything we have on the original canvas," I told O'Malley, forcing my mind back into the narrow, safer corridors of procedure. "Witness statements, patrol logs, interview transcripts. I want names. Everyone who was working the rink that summer, everyone who was at St. Brigid's back then, every priest, every volunteer." "I already started a list," he said. "It's long." "We've waited 43 years, I said. "We can spare the time." He hesitated. "What about you?" "What about me?" "That night when she went missing, where were you?" It was like a flashbulb going off in my head, the blind white glare of a memory I kept turned to the wall. The storm clouds boiling in over the bay, the taste of cheap beer, the sound of tires hissing on wet asphalt. My friends shouting over the wind that we had to go, that it was late, that the cops would notice us if we stayed parked in the rink lot much longer. Maeve inside, finishing her shift in the dull glow of fluorescent lights, wiping down counters, turning off machines. The way she'd asked, "Can you wait?" And the way I'd said, "I'll get you next time," and both of us pretending there would always be a next time. "Home," I said. I was home. Another lie. Or not quite. I had ended up there eventually. The part in between, the part where I drove around with the radio loud enough to drown out my own thoughts, didn't seem like something my junior detective needed to know. O'Malley accepted it with a slow nod, or pretended to. "We'll need to re-interview her mother," he said, "and anyone else still around. People remember things differently when they're older. Sometimes they remember more. Sometimes they remember less," I thought. "Sometimes they change the shadows until they can live with the shapes." "Make the calls," I said. "Start with Mrs. Larkin. Tell her I'm coming personally." He raised an eyebrow. "You think that's wise, given?" "I'm the one who should go." I didn't raise my voice, but the edge in it was enough. She deserves to hear it from me. After he left, closing the door with unnecessary care, the silence settled over the room again. It was the same silence from the rink, from the churchyard, from the space inside my chest where certain things had been kept under lock and key for decades. I opened the first archive box and began to sift through the old files. The paper was brittle in places, edges browned. Black and white photocopies of photos, grainy and indistinct. Typed reports with occasional handwritten notes in the margins. Names I recognized, others I didn't. The old lead detective's writing, sharp, impatient pen strokes, marking lines through avenues of inquiry and scrawling no further action in the corners. I traced that phrase with my eyes again and again, feeling something inside me tighten. No further action. I realized, not for the first time, that my entire career had been one long recoil from those 3 words, a vow never to write them if I could help it. Every case I'd thrown myself into, every overtime shift, every holiday spent hovering over a desk or driving out to a half-frozen farmhouse, it all looped back here. To a girl whose file had been quietly pushed to the back of a cabinet when I was still too young to do anything about it. Obsession doesn't arrive all at once. It grows like mold in a damp corner, spreading slowly until the whole room smells of it. I pinned the photocopy of her missing person poster next to the photo from the bonfire. Last seen, October 17, 1982. The artist's rendering of what she might look like now, created years later for a half-hearted media push, sat in a separate file. I left that one in the folder. I didn't want to see the stranger they imagined. The board was just starting to take shape, a constellation of faded images and old words, when I caught my own reflection in the blank whiteboard beside it. For a second, I didn't recognize myself. The lines at the corners of my eyes, the gray threading through my hair, the set of my mouth. I looked like the kind of man who spent too much time alone with ghosts. I stepped closer, my reflection doubling, distorting under the harsh fluorescent light. "Every case is personal," I whispered to no one. But this one wasn't just personal. It was something else, something deeper and less noble. It was a debt. It was a confession. It was the shape of the life I'd built in the shadow of a single, irreversible choice. Somewhere under the paperwork, under the expectation, under the thin crust of professionalism I wore like a uniform, a younger version of me still stood in a parking lot, car keys in hand, looking back at a neon sign that read Starlight Skate and deciding to turn away. Now, decades later, the past had dug up a silver chain and placed it at my feet. Duty said I was here to solve a crime. The quieter, more insistent voice beneath it whispered that I was here to put myself on trial. The town had no shortage of people willing to remember the past selectively, but only 3 individuals remained whose memories mattered, 3 whose emotional connection to Maeve formed the backbone of the case, and the backbone of the version of myself I had tried to forget. Their faces drifted through my thoughts that evening like silhouettes behind frosted glass, recognizable but weighted by time, sorrow, and something else I hadn't named yet. I found myself sitting in my car outside the Larkin home, engine idling, radio off. The porch light flickered the way it always had, like the house inhaled and exhaled a tired breath. Inside, behind yellow curtains, a shadow moved, and for a moment I felt the same adolescent panic I had felt standing on that porch 43 years ago, too ashamed to knock, too cowardly to face what I'd done. Eileen Larkin opened the door before I could even lift my hand. Years had thinned her, but her posture held a survivor's stiffness, the kind you earn only by carrying other people's absence. She looked at me with a gaze both familiar and foreign, a mother who had aged around a wound instead of healing over it. "Detective Callahan," she said quietly, as if saying my name risked disturbing something fragile. "They told me you were coming." I stepped inside. The house smelled like lavender cleaner and old cedar, the same as it had when Maeve lived here, though the wallpaper had yellowed with age and too many Maine winters. Framed photos covered the mantel, nieces, nephews, family gatherings, but none of Maeve, not anymore. "I'm sorry," I began, but the words snagged. I didn't know which apology to choose, for the necklace, for the years, for the silence. She motioned for me to sit. "You're reopening the case," she said, not asking. Decades had carved the question out of her, replacing curiosity with resignation. "They found something, didn't they?" "A personal item." I watched her hands still around the chipped coffee mug she held, knuckles blanching briefly. "Her necklace," I added softly. Her eyes flickered shut, not dramatically, not with tears, but with a numbness that seemed more painful than grief. "I wondered when it would come back," she said. "That thing, she loved it. She'd fiddle with it whenever she was nervous. I used to tease her about it." The silence that followed felt like it pressed from all directions, as if the walls leaned closer, listening. "She was nervous that night," Eileen murmured. "I could tell, didn't say why, didn't say who she was waiting on." I felt her gaze turn toward me then, sharp, a scalpel, not an accusation. "Were you the one she was waiting for, Callahan?" The question slid into the room like a shadow stretching across the floor. Everything inside me tightened. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell the truth. I wanted to rewind time and give her daughter the one thing I had withheld: time, attention, presence. I don't know, I said finally, because that was the worst part. The not knowing whether she had waited for me, trusted me to keep her safe, or if I'd simply assumed a place in her life that was never mine to take. Eileen studied me with a kind of mournful scrutiny. Then she said something I wasn't prepared for. "Maeve liked you," she whispered. More than she ever said. She worried that wanting anything in this town was dangerous. I felt something unsteady curl in my chest. Shame, maybe, or longing distorted by decades. Before I could respond, the front door opened and another presence entered the room, Maeve's younger brother, Daniel. Taller than I remembered, jaw set in a hard line, eyes carrying a storm I recognized immediately. The kind of anger inherited from grief. "Oh," he said when he saw me, "it's you." He didn't offer a handshake, didn't sit. He leaned against the doorway instead, folding his arms like a barrier. "They found her necklace," he said, voice taut. "You going to tell us who put it there, or do we have to wait another 40 years? The bitterness in his voice was understandable. I felt it like a slap, but beneath the anger something else lingered: fear, the fear of finally knowing. "We're investigating everyone," I said, "including myself." That surprised him, just enough to register as a flicker across his face, but it didn't soften him. "You should," he said. "You were the last." "Daniel," Eileen murmured sharply, warning him off. But the words were already in the room. We all heard them. We all lived inside their echo. I left shortly after, weighed down by the sense that the Larkins were not merely witnesses. They were ghosts trying to stay anchored to a world that had betrayed them. And somewhere beneath that, I sensed something more dangerous. They knew something they had never told, or suspected something they had never voiced, and I wasn't sure which option scared me more. Two other emotionally bound figures needed revisiting as well. One was Father Keene, who'd presided at St. Brigid's for only a year before Maeve vanished. The other was Tom Merrick, the rink's manager back in '82, a man who disappeared into obscurity after the place shut down. Both were threads in the old tapestry, threads I'd avoided pulling for years. But reopening a wound means touching everything it bled on. And this case had bled on all of us. 5. Symbolic clues, photos, diary, patterns build intellectual intrigue. The deeper I went into the archives, the more the case felt less like an investigation and more like a trapdoor beneath my memories. Every document, every faded photograph, every scrawled note seemed to ripple with dual meaning. One interpretation rooted in fact, the other in the fault lines forming inside me. The first clue to shake loose was a photograph. Not the picture from the bonfire, but one from the rink's security booth, the only surviving still from a security camera that broke the following week. It showed the concession counter, the waxy sheen of the floor, a smudge of motion where a figure was skating past, and in the far corner, Maeve's silhouette leaning slightly forward. And beside her, my own. I'd forgotten, or maybe I'd chosen not to remember. The report said I'd left the rink earlier that night, but the grainy rectangle in my hands suggested otherwise, capturing a moment I had never admitted to. In the photo, Maeve's head is tilted. She's saying something to me. The tilt of my body suggests I am leaning closer, listening. Was it a conversation, a confession, a fight? My stomach turned. Memory is a liar, the camera less so. The second clue surfaced from the bottom of the evidence box, a diary, slim, navy blue, water-warped. I remembered the diary vaguely. Maeve carried it everywhere, tucked into her apron or jacket pocket. The old detective had dismissed it as containing nothing directly related to the disappearance, which in cold case language means We didn't understand it, so we ignored it. Inside, the entries were fragmented, half poetic, half confessional, not linear, not safe. One entry, dated 2 weeks before she vanished, read, "Someone watches me leaving work. Not sure who, not sure why. Shadows feel wrong." Another, closer to the disappearance. "I should talk to him, tell him I'm leaving in November, but he's already drifting. I don't want to make it worse." No names, no details. But the word him cut deep. The third and most troubling clue wasn't an object but a pattern, one that emerged only when I layered the new evidence over the old. The necklace found under the rectory, the diary entries, the photo showing us together later than I recalled, and the witness statements. 3 different people had told the original investigators the same thing. They saw a young man circling the rink parking lot the night Maeve disappeared, driving slowly, headlights off. The description matched my car. I gripped the desk so tightly my fingers went numb. The rational part of me insisted there were explanations. Misidentification, foggy memories, overlapping guilt. But another part, the part that had been quiet since 1982, began whispering again. "You were there. You were closer than you admit. You remember less than you think." The symbolic clues weren't pointing outward. They were pointing inward. 6. Twist questions investigators' perception, blurring truth and delusion. By the time I reached the breaking point, sleep had become a stranger, and my mind felt like a dark hallway where every door led to the same room, one filled with shadows shaped like memory. The turning came late one night in the incident room. I was alone, the fluorescent lights buzzing like insects trapped under glass. The photograph from the rink sat pinned at the center of my evidence board, the diary open beside me. I stared at my younger self frozen in that grainy, still frame, trying to recall the exact words spoken in that moment. At some point, the walls seemed to shift, not physically but perceptually. The air thickened. My heartbeat began syncing with the hum of the lights, as if the room itself were breathing. And then I heard it. A sound. Soft, rhythmic, almost like footsteps. Behind me. I spun, but the room was empty. When I turned back to the board, the angle of the photograph looked different, as if the girl in the frame had moved, leaned closer, whispered something. My pulse hammered. I blinked hard, shook my head. Stress, I told myself. Sleep deprivation, trauma resurfacing. Then in the corner of my eye, I saw her. Maeve. Not the girl from the photos, not the smiling face from the bonfire. This version was older, not aged, but weighted by the years she hadn't lived. Her expression was unreadable, her posture still. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood in the doorway, a quiet accusation made flesh. My breath fractured inside my chest. Maeve, the word crumbled on my tongue. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. Because in that moment, whether hallucination, memory, or some waking nightmare, I realized the twist I hadn't wanted to face. The case wasn't about discovering what had happened to her. It was about discovering what I had forgotten about myself. Not the crime, not the motive, but the truth I had suppressed so deeply it had become a ghost. I staggered back, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. Every clue, every symbol, every resurfaced memory was a reflection, not of her disappearance, but of my own fragmentation. The twist wasn't that I had hurt her. It was that I might never truly know if I had or not. Because perception was the enemy, and mine was collapsing. When I finally looked toward the doorway again, she was gone. But the sense of being watched remained. 7. Ending feels haunting and unresolved. Truth brings no peace. The arrest the town would later talk about. A former priest, Father Mallory, quietly removed from St. Brigid's in 1984 after accusations that never saw daylight, became the official ending. His fingerprints were found on a rusted lighter buried near the necklace. His old journals contained references to temptations and interactions with parish youth. Enough circumstantial evidence surfaced to paint him as the villain the town needed. The case was declared solved. But closure is an illusion, a clean word used to mask jagged edges. The night after the arrest, I drove back to the roller rink. The building loomed against the moonlit bay, a skeleton of its former self. I stepped inside, breathing in the salt-wet air, letting the silence settle over me like old dust. The boards creaked under my feet as I walked to the center of the rink, beneath the dead disco ball. My reflection fractured into 1,000 dim shards. "Maeve," I whispered. The name echoed once twice, then dissolved. I didn't know if the truth we found was the real one. I didn't know if the memories I dredged up were accurate or inventions of guilt. I didn't know if I'd abandoned her that night, or if she had left before I ever had the chance to save her. All I knew was this: the case was solved. But my part in it remained a question I would never be able to answer honestly, not even to myself. The silence pressed in, thick and unyielding. Outside, waves pounded the distant shore. The rink's broken skylight hummed with wind. And in that dim, hollow space, I felt her presence, not accusing, not forgiving, just there. A residue of a life unfinished. A memory that refused to stay buried. A truth too fractured to ever fully hold. I closed my eyes. And the darkness felt like recognition.